Hello, everyone. Welcome to the launch of the forA on the Urban website. I can see faces, some people that we know very well. As welcome everyone, including the ones that we don't know. And for the ones that are entering for the first time, and as a general overview for those that you are here and trying to know what we have been doing during these 2 years, this is a very important project for the Young Evante and as well as for the IUA. And the project was born as a commission. Someone is, as I explained in Venice already in September, the project was born as a commission coming from our
Christina, we cannot hear you.
Since when?
Since the very beginning, I believe.
Since the very beginning?
No, just the last sentence.
Oh,
okay, now because the cable touched the computer, and this is the crazy technology nowadays.
Venice Biennale was the keyword.
Yeah. Well, I was explaining that we already explained many things that we are not going to talk again about this because today is for Alex Lin and Nikolaus Hirsch, it's their day. But I will remember that the project is based on or composed by 3 columns: the events or symposiums, like the first one in Venice, the physical thing with very nice things inside. That is the second one, and then the website. And today is the day that we are launching the website. And before starting, I will introduce, as I normally do, the editorial board. That is Andrea Borner, Barbara Mueller. They are with us in here. Then my partner, Efraín García Grinda, and I, and myself. And as part of the team, also the editorial manager, Roswitha Janowski-Fritz. She's also in there on top, managing. And finally, a new member of the team that will enter a bit later. That is the editor-in-chief, Sarah Handelman. But as I said, the protagonists today are Alex Lin and Nikolaus Hirsch. So we will introduce Alex first a bit for those that you maybe don't know him. He is based in New York and is the designer of the physical publication. So for sure, this beautiful thing is coming from his amazing mind, and also the website. And he will explain the design approach to the overall project, the organization, the publication, but also the relationship between the physical incarnation and the website itself. Just a few things about him. He founded the Studio Lin in 2009, and he holds a Master of Fine Arts in Graphic Design from Yale. Noah Beckwith joined the studio only 2 years ago or something, 2021, but he has been also a very important part of the work. Some of the current projects include books with MOS. Well, he writes books with MOS, and he will explain why, because he normally works in hand to hand with the people, and the design is not coming only for him, and he's in here. Welcome, Alex. We are still introducing you.
Hi, I apologize, everyone. Thanks for the introduction.
No problem. This part, you know it very well. This is your curriculum. So, so I was explaining that you have been working with MOS, with Hilary and Michael, and with MoMA, with Harvard GSD, the Whitney Museum, ICA in Miami. Well, it's a long list. And also you have done website and identity projects with Untitled Art, Flamingo, and now, of course, for on the Urban, which are, I mean, for us is super important, as we have been telling you since the very beginning. Then we have Nikolaus Hirsch today. He is a polyphacetic person. He's an architect, he's an educator, he's a curator, he's an editor. I'm sure that you all know that he's the co-founder and publisher of e-flux architecture. And since 2020, the director of the Museum of Culture and Architecture in Brussels. So he's in between Brussels and Frankfurt. He was the director of the Städelschule Academy of Art in Frankfurt, and also the Portikus Halle, both very close in Frankfurt. And he has created 1,000 exhibitions. The list is endless. And also in 2021, he was the co-curator of the Urban Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. He has been visiting professor in Europe, in the US, so he has a lot of experience, as you can see. I didn't go, I won't go through the list of also constructed buildings. As I said, it's very, very polyphacetic, this guy. That's why we are so happy that he's here. He has books like On Boundaries, Institution Building, Critical Spatial Practice Series. He has like many ways of addressing the discipline, if we can say discipline. And right before starting, because now Frank will be in charge, I will explain you that today is Frank is giving you a short intro, then Alex explaining the project, and then they will smoothly pass to a conversational kind of conversation, first between Alex and Nikolaus, and finally we will open the conversation to everyone for questions and comments.
Yep. So basically, the session will be organized as Christina was explaining, but we hope that this talk will be offer a big insight into Studio Lin design processes, its methods and approaches, but also in the further conversation with Nikolaus. What does it mean nowadays to generate content, to curate it, to edit and to publish it in different formats, and doing it in such a complex field such as urban studies, and from the point of view of architecture, which is something that is shared between many of the Nikolaus activities and forA on the urban. I think the discussion hopefully will be verse about the relevance of physical publication and virtual platforms in content and knowledge generation, and the role of design on all these, and in which mean our physical publications are still relevant in nowadays in the ocean of information that we are surrounded by. But let me introduce quickly many of you, because I see the faces and the names, so many of you know already the project, but for those who don't know, I would like to make a very, very, very short introduction as the background information for what Studio Lin was doing with us. Basically, forA on the urban, as Christina explained, tries to bring together questions and thoughts and to instigate debates on the contemporary urban condition. forA is simply the plural of forum, meaning many different forums that could be, the target for this complex project. As Christina was explaining, is having 3 different parallel, incarnations. And is forA with an emphasis in the A for architecture, but also an A for the Angewandte. And it's basically a vehicle for discussion and a place, a platform to address and to portray as well the contemporary urban condition. I won't explain many of the things, but let me say that we're trying to do so because we are within an Institute of Architecture, the 4 of us, the editorial board. We are all teaching in there in an Institute of Architecture, and we're trying to address the urban condition through an expanded notion of architecture. In a way, trying to resituate architecture in the field of spatial studies and recovering for it a certain societal relevance, furthermore than its utilitarian, its economic, or its aesthetical nature. So trying to recover from that point of view, the urban challenges, a certain relevance for our discipline and for our work, that could be also different from others, but in collaboration also with other disciplines. Through its triple format, Christina explained, website, physical publication, and events, forA aims to become a vehicle for the study, dissemination of those urban challenges, but also stimulating dialogue around them. Trying to, in a way, through these 3 different manifestations, to construct a discourse that one of them is triggering other conversations, other subjects in the next ones. forA on the urban, and I have to say this because we were the ones initially receiving this commission from our rector, but we understood immediately it's a platform about the urban condition nowadays needs to be a communal endeavor. Just as the very same notion of the urban necessarily embraces diversity, multiplicity, and the collectives as fundamental conditions for such a project. So we are in both the first or the issue number 0, these first events, but also in this series that will come afterwards. We welcome and celebrate the multiplicity of voices that could be relevant about the urban nowadays, and wants to acknowledge and present multiple approaches and different voices coming from different authors, discipline, origins, and also as well different states on the academic development of the authors, different ages, different in a way demographics. So distinguishing not only by the classical criteria of well-established scholars, or just opening up an open call for everyone, but mixing those in order to have this variety of different voices also coming from many multiple places. Also, we one of the very first things that we asked Alex, and this was one of our first debates with him, was the necessity of accepting and introducing in both the publication and the website many different formats. And this was like something that was in a way coming through the idea of the essay, accepting also the different natures that or the different outputs that an essay could have. But also, we didn't want to introduce any hierarchy, introducing classical curatorial, in a way, conventions, distinguishing between the open calls and the different contributors, or distinguishing between different medias. And this was a complex challenge for both the editorial work that followed up, but also for the design itself. Basically, we aimed with forA to not be the authors or the editors, but becoming facilitators in this process of triggering conversations. And this was the really important key question that we addressed. The issue number 0 was very much about discussing for all the voices that we invited to contribute and the open and the contributors that were selected from the open call. What is this? What could be urban nowadays? How we could define by starting conversation the urban in these difficult times. With this, I think you have a bit of background of the general project. And we simply now will pass the virtual floor to Alex to just simply present what they intended to respond with to all these complex questions that we were having on the table for us as editorial board, but also for the advisory board that we are welcoming several of them that are present today. And also for as a design task. So Alex, your turn.
Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for having me here to speak about this project. So Studio Lin is a 3-person design studio. We're based in Brooklyn, New York, and we started on this project with forA a little over a year ago. I'm going to be talking through our role in this project, and as well as following up with talking through the website, which has recently launched. So basically, this document that I'm going to talk through is a kind of condensed version of all the various documents that we presented to forA as we kind of designed the identity, website, and publication. So just to recap, this is what forA is about. The presentation is showing our design process for starting with the identity, leading to a temporary website, going to a publication, and then the launch of a final website. So in the beginning, it was just kind of important for us to recognize the three legs of forA. So there's the website, publication, and events. We begin every identity project by kind of just identifying what the identity should express, what are its characteristics. So in this case, we always keep it very simple. We are trying to find characteristics that can be visual. So the first thing is expressing diversity through layered dynamic elements, and then providing a flexible structure to promote multiple perspectives and different types of content. So with that in mind, the basic thing that we needed to create was a logo type. So here, simply forA capitalizing the A and dropping it down emphasizes the kind of architecture aspect of forA, as well as kind of it gives it a more recognizable logo type. And then we converted this basic typography into a series of dots, and the dotted version became the logo type. So one of the things that we always had in mind in the beginning was creating a logo that can function across many different platforms, such as website, visual things on screen, as well as printed things for the publication. So the dot logo allows us to perforate, allows us to emboss and deboss, and apply various different effects. As another really basic element of any identity, it's typography. So we chose these two typefaces, and we use them in a very specific way. So the smaller typeface called pica is used for smaller information, such as footnotes, navigation things, and then the heavier weight type is used for running text and main body text. This shows how the logo can start to kind of overlap the typography to create a kind of a layered effect, with allowing both things to be visible at the same time. In the beginning, for the launch of a temporary website, we didn't necessarily have images to work with yet. So one of the things that we introduced was this idea of blurring images, which allowed us to essentially use any image without any need for rights clearance, because once you blur the image, it's not recognizable anymore. And it allowed us to have a color palette based on images. So after the basic identity, we immediately created a temporary website for forA. And the temporary website is just meant to communicate some basic things, the progress of the website, the people involved, etc. So this was the landing page of the temporary website. This shows the various elements. We're using a blurred image to create color in the background. And then the site just has very basic information, such as the manifesto, the open call for contributions, guidelines, the board, and the imprint. So again, here, we're using that blurred image as the entire background of the temporary website. And then you also begin to see how the typography is used. The smaller monospace type is used for imprint, and then larger body text is the bolder type. Once we had the temporary website, we immediately jumped into designing the publication, the physical piece of forA. And for the publication, we wanted to turn to the manifesto to find characteristics that we wanted to communicate through these physical things. So the three primary characteristics that we got from the manifesto, which we wanted to apply, were this idea of scale, economy, and being unfinished. open. So what does that mean? The first element, scale, there were 15 different contributions of varying lengths and varying content. So some contributions were very visual, some had a lot of text, some had an equal amount of text and image. So the idea was to sort, for the publication, to order the sequence of contributions by shortest to longest. So that was a way to avoid a hierarchy. And also it kind of brought to mind going through just a personal thing. Whenever I read a collection of short stories, I tend to always find the shortest ones to read first to find out if I'm interested in reading the longer ones. So just kind of using that idea to sequence the contributions within the publication. The other thing we wanted to explore was to physically explore is scale as a design element. So what does that mean to always think about scale? Like, is it big, is it small, is it both, etc. So here, one of the very initial ideas was to use, for the actual publication, to look at extremely small sizes for things. And just given that most of us read on our phones almost all the time, we are quite used to reading things in a kind of miniature way. So this was one of the initial ideas to kind of miniaturize the publication. The second characteristic we were interested in was this idea of economy. So if the journal is concerned with sustainability, efficiency, and economy, we think that the design should reflect that. So basically, the design is based on pragmatism rather than pragmatism exploring this aesthetic of limitations rather than achieving this brand or effect. So one thing related to economy and also related to scale is the way things are printed. So books are printed in very large sheets, which they fold down into pages. So we looked at the smallest page, or actually the largest page with the largest amount of pages that could fit into one printing sheet. And so by making it 80 by 160 millimeters, we could get 64 pages out of a printing sheet, which is probably the most economical way you can use a printing sheet. Economy also means economy in design. So this was an example of work we do with MOS. Basically, it's always the same type size. It doesn't matter if the book is small or big, we're always using the same type size. So what this means is that we spend less time fussing around with, how big or small the type is, and more time exploring other things such as content, sequencing of content, language. Related to economy, we know that we wanted to have forA publication be not only a book, but various other elements. So we came across this box, which would also serve as the box that it shipped in, so that there's no need for extra packaging. And this was very entertaining. This guy standing on this tiny cardboard box and just showing how kind of indestructible it was. And then the very last characteristic that was important to us was this idea of this thing being unfinished or open, having a non-prescriptive user experience. And we immediately thought of the first publication being this kind of kit of parts, exploring various sizes, various formats, various kinds of printing, etc. With that in mind, we began designing the publication. And so this was the content summary that needed to be contained within the publication. So there were 20 contributions of varying lengths and also 4 questionnaires. So we knew that there would be 3 main elements in the publication. So a shipping storage box, a booklet, and then supplemental items. This was the initial design sketch for the cover of the booklet, and you see it's basically exactly the same size as an iPhone Pro Max. We wanted the logo to be perforated out of the cover to give a kind of material interest. And then the spine is exposed. There's no covering over the spine. And then these were some initial layouts for the publication. So again, looking at this idea of ordering the content from shortest to longest. So we took the shortest contribution to start with, and then the longest to end. We also applied some ideas that are more native to websites or where we kind of timed, we suggested a time for each of the contributions. So, you know, for example, like the first contribution would be 2 minutes, the second 3 minutes, etc. The time it takes to read it. To overcome this kind of very small format, sometimes we allowed the type to cross the gutter just so that it can become bigger. And then this was the kind of general layout for most of the contributions. So we always tried to make the image as big as possible with very simple layout ideas. One other important thing to note, we chose to print the publication entirely in black and white. So the booklet itself was completely black and white. There were a couple reasons for this. Budgetary reasons were one of them. The black and white printing is substantially cheaper than full color printing. It also allowed the booklet itself to visually be very cohesive. Once you make images black and white, they flow together much better. We were dealing with images from various different sources, some very high quality, some lower quality. So making it black and white created this kind of more smooth experience through the publication. The next item was the shipping storage box. So we came across this box format where it was based around a sleeve and a tray, and we felt that it was more elegant than the standard box. So then we started rendering what would the type look like, how it would feel as you first encountered the content. One very important part of our practice is spending a lot of time making these drawings because it really truly simulates the final product. So even though graphic design is a very two-dimensional experience, some would say, whenever it's a physical object, in order to understand the object, you need to see it from various different angles because that's how you experience things in the real world. The bottom of the box featured a kind of contents of the box on the bottom. So there was a publication, a bookmark, a puzzle, and a poster. And it also shows the various scale relationships of each of the items. So here, we also wanted to make these things which we called supplements. So these supplements are the content in the publication, but made physical in different ways. So the first one we were interested in was taking one of Peter Cook's illustrations and making it into a 9-piece puzzle. We also looked at making it a jigsaw puzzle, but there were budgetary reasons why we made it simple. The second supplement was a poster. The poster has many, many folds, and once it folds out, it's about 7 times the size of the publication. So as part of the characteristics that we were interested in was was this idea of scale. Like, how can this publication have various scale in the various elements? So the poster allowed us to introduce something that was very large. And these were different options for the front and back of the poster. All the images come from the contributions themselves. And the last supplement was a bookmark. The bookmark takes one image from each of the contributions if they have images, or a text excerpt from the contribution if the contribution didn't have images, and places them within the vertical bookmark format. So this was a way to get a peek at the actual color of the images. And it also served as a different way to jump to and navigate to the various contributions. So we were just exploring a few different formats for this. And then the overview of the various pieces that came in the box. So there's a bookmark, the publication, the puzzle, and the poster. So so that's where we left off with the publication design, and then I'm now going to jump to the website. So as you enter the website, this is meant to be a very, very quick read, just explaining what this website is. And it's also meant to say simply what the latest important thing that happened was. So in this case, a publication was launched in Venice quite recently. This homepage always features a different image from the contributions, but it's blurred. So the website has a very simple structure. Each of the contributions are represented by a text or an image. So on this homepage, you can encounter all the contributions. And then if you click on each of these, that takes you to the actual contribution itself. The blurring effect helps focus and also gives feedback on being clickable. So for example, if I click into this article, you can read the full article along with images. So the main content of the site is, of course, the contributions. And then we have the sidebar quick jump menu, where you can quickly jump to the About section, a section which we're calling the timeline, which tracks all the kind of major milestones of forA, followed by the manifesto and a publication. So this is dedicated to, again, reinforcing the publication as one of the three legs of forA. So this is a slideshow just talking about the physical publication issue 0. And you'll see that these final scans and photos look very much like what we presented in the flat PDFs. This slideshow is the various events. So we've captured a few key images from the book launch. And then that's followed by the imprint below. So that concludes Studio Lin's presentation for this.
Thank you, Alex. It's probably my turn now to raise some questions and discuss your work. Maybe before going more into a discussion on the publication and the website and the specific concepts, I'd be interested to know a little bit or to hear more about what you think about that particular project, which is for a school. Most of your projects, I guess, have been with either architectural offices or museums quite often. To what extent is this project forA, project for a school, different? Because schools, as I see them in my experience, are very particular as a microcosm, often much more complex and to a certain way very dynamic, sometimes also uncontrollable.
Yeah, that's very true. The distinctions are pretty great. I think in this case, what really matters is the kind of gathering of feedback and consensus regarding, you know, the design. And in this case, I think the forA team have been really good in kind of talking amongst themselves and then communicating in a way that is like a group consensus, you know. I imagine that the trouble comes from the potential pitfalls of organizations is that the feedback itself could be confusing because there's so many people involved, you know. And so in terms of like the clients like architecture studios, for example, as a counterpoint, the ways of working are as different as people's personalities. Like completely different ways of working depending on who the client is. So for example, we recently did OMA New York's monograph. That involved generally 1 to 2 stakeholders, 1 to 2 people making all the decisions. And I mean, as part of OMA's working process, my understanding is that they explored a lot of different potential solutions for problems, like a lot. Like they will explore things that they don't think, things from the absurd to the most practical. So a whole range of exploration. And that's, we kind of mirrored that in the way when we presented things to them. We explored things that we didn't necessarily think would work, but would be interesting to OMA. So, and then a completely different way of working is when we work with MOS, where again, MOS is really one stakeholder. And basically, we design and communicate almost 90% through texting back and forth. And one of the reasons we can do that is because the design itself, the intention was to be so simple and straightforward that we wouldn't really have to talk about the design, because we all knew that it was accidents, grotesques, tracked out 30, all one size. So design really became less of a factor. And we talked about things like, you know, what should the content be? How should it be structured? So it, you know, the way we work with clients is really, really depending on the client.
Right. And I suspect that what's quite crucial in a project like forA is somehow to define your role as a designer and art director in quite an expanded way. So this whole process of editing content becomes much more crucial, I guess, in such an open-ended situation, such a slightly blurry situation, like an academic context. Can you describe a little bit how you understand your role as a designer in this specific project, but maybe beyond that?
Yeah, I think in every project, our role is to communicate the content in a way that is most suitable, and also kind of brings to light the initial kind of manifesto, or the important things that need to be communicated. So whether we come in and we suggest ways to order content or sequence content or release content, like it's all design to me. It doesn't matter if it's not visual.
Right. And the now coming to probably firstly the physical product, the publication, which is really fantastic. I have looked into it again, and it's an incredibly interesting, original approach. It reminded me a lot, or to a certain extent, to Duchamp's box in a valise, kind of things in a suitcase, where it's like a small exhibition in a way. So I think here your way of editing content becomes very particular and very expanded, going much beyond the kind of classic role model of a designer, where you get a brief, you get a list of content, and then you put it into a book. Can you maybe expand on this a little bit? So how far can you imagine pushing your role as a designer into a role which is very close to what classically is called a curator?
I think initially, just going back to looking at the manifesto for forA and then coming up with characteristics, one of them was this idea of being multifaceted. And so with that in mind, and with kind of with forA on board with that idea, I think forA were more receptive to the idea of kit of parts, because that is communicating this idea of multiplicity and various formats. So I think always in the beginning, if we can get buy-in to ideas without designing anything yet, that allows us more freedom to try out things that might not necessarily be, in the purview of a graphic designer. I mean, luckily, I think there's a lot of trust between us and forA, and so that always helps with our ideas, being receptive to our ideas.
I think this, I wonder whether this kind of expanded role, this open-endedness, is also something very crucial for the website, because you also mentioned that this is one of the principles actually of the whole concept for forA. I was wondering, maybe in comparison between the physical product and the website, there seem to be very different models of how you launch it and how you perceive it in relation to time, because I think this box is something you are given, or you send it to people, so you get it in one go. Whereas a website, this seems to be a kind of growing medium. I wonder, is there a particular rhythm to it? What will be the next editions, or is it a kind of permanent growth?
Yeah, obviously the publication is frozen in time, and the website is a living thing. Content is edited all the time, added, taken away. the structure of the site, basically the main page here is meant to always have the latest thing first. So any contributions that come up, any kind of new projects that come up with forA are always presented first. So when you land on the site, obviously you get the newest thing first. And then
does it change? Yeah, if I may ask, how often does it change? Just to get an idea of the rhythm of change and of growth.
We'll have to ask
daily rhythm, weekly, or I'm just trying to
sure.
maybe to figure out how we can see the next steps and what to expect also from the website in the future.
I know there's a project in the works where the physical publication is being sent out to various people, and they are going to annotate the physical publication. And I imagine that will become the next piece of content that you can encounter on the website. So it really depends. There's no set schedule for new content on the homepage.
Mm-hmm.
But there is, as part of this process project, we have also an Instagram page, and we do have a plan for the Instagram page. Basically, we communicate the 3 legs of forA. So there's a certain type of post devoted to publications, a certain type of post devoted to events, and a different post for events, publication, and the website. So we plan on doing that maybe on a weekly basis. And so we wanted to make a system that isn't so tedious, where you're creating content for Instagram and then you have to create another content for the website. So you see, the strategy here is to limit the publication post to square images with a short text underneath. So this is literally like one post on the website that we can now reapply to Instagram.
There's direct translation between the website and Instagram to some extent, which I find super interesting. How do you, in general, think about this relation between a website and social media, So also in terms of readership and people to look at.
Sure. I mean, I have my personal ways of using Instagram, and it's like, I literally don't know how any other people use Instagram, but I personally, I hardly go to websites these days. My news comes in bits and pieces, through Instagram. If I see something on Instagram that I'm really interested in, then I go to the website. So it's this way, like I see Instagram as a kind of way to drive traffic to websites. As obviously, as well as other things. So the idea is that if forA posts one square devoted to the website, it might focus on one contribution, and it will show like for example, this contribution. It might show a little bit of text and an image with the hopes of someone seeing that little snippet and then going to the website to read the whole contribution, as well as others. So,
well, in that respect, could you see an evolution of forA in the next few years, where actually the intensity of Instagram use somehow guides also the website, so that Instagram is not a byproduct of the website, but almost the other way around?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure. That's.
I'm never sure. We're not sure whether Instagram still exists in 3 years. So that's.
Yeah, I hope maybe it goes away. But how do you feel about how do you use Instagram?
Well, since I'm a bit older than you, I guess I'm not a big Instagram user. So this is also I guess a little bit because I'm working with e-flux, so where it's still pretty much a website, although there is Instagram and other social media, but it's very much driven by a website. And but of course, a very strong, as you called it, leg in terms of events and projects, and these projects very often have a complexity that is maybe not easy to break down into Instagram. But that's, I think there's certainly an evolution into much more moving image, into a more greater variety in terms of these different media. But I'm concerning my own perception. I'm probably not a very good example for Instagram to a certain extent, but it brings me a bit to this question of distribution, which I think for a project that is has started from an academic context and is probably still quite academic in a way in terms of its readership. What do you think about distribution of such a project? And of course, you as a designer and art director are in a key position to think about this.
Distribution. You know, I think after you make something, the next thing to do is promote it to make sure, you know, as many people can encounter it as possible. So there's a kind of, you know, and that also relates to having physical events and things like that. Distribution itself of the physical publication, that I'm not like, I don't have that much experience with the workings of that. And I mean, I'd be really interested in hearing about the challenges of kind of getting this physical object into, you know, various locations.
I can tell you how, for instance, the physical object worked in my case. So I guess I received it in a moment where I was totally into a project, so I didn't have much time. And the interesting thing is that usually when you receive a book, and I receive a lot of books every day, you put it in your shelf and you hardly look into it. Yeah? Even though these might be a book coming from friends and with amazing content. But this box, somehow it was staying on the shelf, and actually got 3 boxes. It was very generous from you guys. And it somehow didn't follow the logic of other books, which created actually these moments that I quite often look into it and find out something about the content. So in my case, it worked really well, I have to say, because it's still this kind of small little box with a lot of surprises and interesting content. And so I think in that sense, it's really, really very successful and fantastic project. And with the websites, I, of course, have looked into it, and it is certainly a different mode of perception. So I think it's certainly more uniform than the content in the box. I think by its nature, it's just one flat surface, and you can click. That's what you can do, and that's I guess the problem of every website.
I propose to open the conversation to the general audience, also because there are some advisory board members within the audience, so maybe they want to just ask you or comment something.
Sure.
Like this, anyone.
It's like probably too. I didn't want to stop you anyway.
It was a good moment.
But it was very flattering for Alex and also for the work that we have done, what you have said about the box.
Yeah, please, Claudia. Go ahead with the question.
You can open your mic and your camera if you want. It's a good question.
Well, we can say that who I mean the question is who, well, you can do by yourself if you want.
Thank you for the question.
But thank you for the question, yeah.
Hi everybody. Do you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly. Yeah.
Okay, thank you first of all for the very fine introduction and the explanation of the project. And by listening, I had two very practical questions. One would be, who is in future producing all the content? And a very perspective from the practice, who is actually paying for it, or what do people get for contribution? Easy questions.
I
guess this question is not going for Alex or Nikolaus. So the editorial board should be in charge. Any Barbel, Andrea, or us?
If you want, I can try to give a brief answer, since the project is started last year without us ever physically meeting, but mostly being in Zoom. Funny enough, it was so within the process, and especially for the issue 0, it was, I think it was mentioned by Alex, let's say on the side, that it was partially invited contributions, where we directly addressed, let's say, authors, partially from the advisory board, partially from the outside of the advisory board, to contribute with either their work that they're doing, or with a questionnaire that we sent out to open up. And it was an open call where anybody could just apply and send abstracts, and then invited, let's say, full contributions. So with regard to content, it will keep being open, and we will find different ways, or maybe to add on. So with regard to what Alex also mentioned, the current phase of the project that we call annotations, where we again invite people to annotate on existing contributions, which is a kind of, let's say, mechanism in order to build up on the knowledge or on the contributions or the content that was that we started off with. So it will have this kind of, let's say, growing factor of working on things that we have already and bringing in further contributions from the outside and further views. And it will not be only text. We also think of inviting, let's say, photographs, snapshots of different cities. I think so. This is all under discussion. So the content being produced will be very diverse from different sites and different peoples and also genre. With regard to the payment, that's very difficult to say, since an academic project. I guess we have to get into fundraising in order to then also allow for this. I don't know if this does this answer your question sufficiently for the moment?
Yes, in parts, I would say. I mean, is it? I mean, you could say it's not the aim to bring it out of academia. So then would be a question: would be whether it would be good to stick with the academic field, or whether wouldn't it be super interesting to combine it with the non-academia field. So, but if you stick to academia, those issues might not be a problem with the contribution or the payment or the money. But if you think further, it's interesting how people solve those questions, because a lot of projects, they just disappear because there's no solution of that. So if someone has good solutions, I think it would be good to keep ongoing, getting stuff from academia out into the rest of the world.
Yes, I think we would all agree on this. And maybe if you have some advice, we will come back to you at a later moment. But happy if you leave your setting in a different space, I guess, since we now rather would look into the, not so much into economics and materialities of the project itself. I guess that's a different, if you agree.
Thanks, Phil.
Well, I don't know if anyone has more questions, but I would be interested in knowing what is the difference. I mean, in your experience, Nikolaus and Alex, what is the difference? I mean, you explained that a bit, but how do you manage, the curatorial versus the design? Because you asked specifically this question, Nikolaus, about with to Alex, what are the differences? What are the boundaries? How could you navigate, the problem of editing, curating, and designing, and how is that different in the different projects you addressed, and specifically in your case, Nikolaus, because you're working with other designers as well in websites, and differently from our project, obviously, but we are also interested in knowing how do you see the differences between the projects that you were dealing with and the problem of designing websites that need to be related with a specific content and they need to be updated. How do you see the differences between this project and others that you were involved in?
Yeah, I think I'm personally always intrigued by projects where these kind of typical patterns of distribution of labor between disciplines are somehow being broken apart or at least stretched, because I think this is a bit what's the great thing about collaborating with different people is actually that you are not in a static position, so that you can actually somehow stretch these limits and also do things together or enter new territories because there's a trust. Of course, trust is the basis of that kind of collaboration, because otherwise you would basically stick to these very precisely defined boundaries. And that's also a bit, of course, in most institutions, you also need to do contracts with people, whether they're architects or curators or designers, etc. And contracts always tend to define things, but usually they don't describe at all what a good project is, because in an interesting project, you recalibrate the parameters of what people are doing. So in that sense, I'm always totally fascinated by projects. I'm intrigued by projects where I can do things that I never did before, or I do much less that I normally do, for instance. I think that's also interesting, to just not let it go, but to give a platform to someone who can fill that. And then there are certainly also, I guess, projects that are so complex and large in terms of how you edit, how you have to edit content, that you see you need a certain web architecture and grid. Otherwise, you cannot, because I think there are certain limits to improvisation, I would say, on a website, and some of these issues also have to do with the longevity, with the duration of a website, because of course, when you look, for instance, into biennials, like we just did the German Pavilion in Venice, and I don't know, there were probably 70 other national pavilions, and every national pavilion creates a new website. It's actually part of the job description of the curator. But it might be interesting to see what these websites are doing, what they are in 2 years. I guess most of them are either non-existing or slightly defunct, like the ruin of a website. So I think that's probably in itself a super interesting topic for research, like the ruins of websites and of projects. It's probably incredibly interesting to really look into this, because it's a genre on its own. And I think this is something that I find interesting when one probably accepts that there are different durations also for websites, like almost like in architecture, where you also have some buildings that are in its nature much more about duration. Yeah, say if you build a hospital, also I guess it's not a good idea to demolish it after a year or so. But there, on the other side, there are pavilions and there are temporary buildings, and I guess it's similar for websites, that some of them are more like small injections and have a certain duration. And what's interesting in your project, that it's actually hard to say what the duration is. But of course, the ambition is that it has duration. But as I see it, that the concept developed by Alex is from the beginning working with a kind of spirit of a certain liberty, freedom, open-endedness, which I think is very adequate for what you're doing.
I would like to comment on this because we had quite interesting discussions what the relevance of the website is in relation to the publication, to events, but also to social media. And as you said, Nikolaus, the forA box is quite experimental, and we know that the next issue will look very different, responding to the respective topic, which will evolve soon. And that to us the website is also like it's more like this stable base or platform where things are archived and also somehow equalized, so that it could be that the next print artifact looks very different, but the contents chapter of the website will continue containing it. So I think in our case, the website is like the stable backbone and everything else is shifting and changing. But Alex, maybe you want to comment on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. The website has obvious limitations to, most websites nowadays, all of them have this thing called a backend where editors and basically anyone can go in and add content and edit content. And with that backend comes limitations on the front end. So right now we have maybe 2 or 3 different modules that you can use to create a contribution. So those modules limit what the contribution can look like in the end. It's basically, combinations of text blocks and image blocks. So by that restraint, no matter how the contribution looks in physical form, it will always have to conform to the templates of the website. So it's interesting, to think of a physical object having more freedom than a digital website in a way. But yeah, I mean, that's the case here.
I have one question in here. Hannes Trautmann is wanting to add something.
Yeah, thanks for the very interesting discussion. I mean, I'm constantly revolving around the idea if there is an already existing new options for communicating things, which is based on this kind of metaverse. And I really would be interesting, let's say, after me, my generation went to, I don't know, exhibitions to Frankfurt, bought books, returned home and discussed on the book pages. Now we're discussing via web pages. But I mean, as we in our projects already communicate spatial qualities in an interactive process on the virtual reality, realm, augmented realm, and that would be for me the question is, could this be a fourth leg of this way to communicate content, or what, Alex and also Nikolaus, what is your opinion towards, let's say, a future further step of communicating content? That's, I mean, I'm personally interested in that. Not criticizing the project, of course, but I mean, as I'm constantly kind of, let's say, involved in things like that, I'm not a specialist in that, I have to say, but as I observe our employees and people around me, there's lots of going on in that, and we know this kind of, let's say, big business that's been done with this game software and so on and so forth. So could this be a new option to communicate things?
Adding on this, Hannes, because there was constantly a question for us on the table, if this needed to be a physical printed thing or not. This was the big, I mean, for me, apart from the question you just made, is the other question is how these new media affect the older ones, the ones that are already in place, and what is the placement of them in relation with the new ones. And I believe that for me is absolutely relevant thing. So I believe that, I mean, the four of us in the discussions, and I don't want to answer the question by myself, I'm just putting, you know, or paving the floor for others to maybe respond to the question. For us, it was really important to think about the role of the book, thinking that this needed to be still a printed thing, a real thing.
Well, I think in general, one could probably say that maybe these different media, whether they're printed books or websites or Instagram or other new technologies, Mark Zuckerberg's metaverse, etc. I think in a way, what we have seen in the past years is that it's not that one medium totally replaces another one. And I think your project shows a bit how things can work in a complementary way. And this is something, at least from my experience, what the real challenges and also the fun is actually to combine different media, because I think they all have qualities, like the haptic, the tangible quality of a box or a book is something that still works. Yeah? It's not over, because many people talked about the end of the book, but it's not. Well, it has been the end of many bookshops, that's true. But I think it's not the end of the book or anything printed or made in 3D. And at the same time, things on the web or digital media will evolve. And I personally have no idea where it will go. But I think one of the, I guess, the key questions is really distribution. Yeah, so how do things get to people? And this is a bit where I think with the box, this has been quite inventive in a way, or it has been quite efficient, I guess. I don't know how it works, whether you can buy it in bookshops or not. I think that's another question I get, because so far, I guess you used a particular type of distribution for this object. But for me, it's worth to think all this together. And I think it makes sense in combination.
I mean, the question of like the physical versus the virtual, I mean, in my opinion, things aren't real unless it's printed. Like, it's like these contributions and things like that, they can easily live online as text and images in a, you know, obviously digital, but that's not, to me, even my generation, like, I don't feel that as a real thing. You know, it's not, one of my clients was like, it's not real until I print it. And so that's this idea. It's also, I find it interesting, you know, I work with much younger designers, and I once had this discussion with them. I was like, I was like, you know, I want us to focus on books and things of permanence, relative permanence. And one of my younger designers was like, why would you want to do that? Like, I really want to do things that change all the time, like websites. And so we got into this discussion of the pluses and minuses of spending like extraordinary amounts of time designing things. And do you want the outcome to be a physical thing or a digital thing? And it's funny, I think generation, like the younger generation tends to not place value in physical things as much as my generation, perhaps. So it's a really interesting question to think about.
But in a way to maybe add on this, I certainly come from more from the experience of books. Obviously, when I studied architecture, it was all about books and architecture magazines. But certainly through the experience, this was also a time when I stopped then my deanship at Städelschule. So I returned, I also felt the need to go back a little bit more into architecture. But one of the first questions was a bit, well, what is architecture today? And this was around, I don't know, 2013 or something like this, 14. So not so long ago, but I realized that all the magazines that I was reading, they either didn't exist anymore, or they felt a bit outdated, or I don't know. I didn't have the same pleasure as before. And this was also the moment when Anton Vidocq and I came back to this old idea to create a kind of architecture element in e-flux. And to me, this is real. Yeah? It is as real as a book, I have to say, although I touch it in a different way, but I have to say I touch it every day, yeah, on a smartphone, on a computer. So I'm connected to it, and it's something that through which, you know, it's a tool also to create a discussion with other people, with colleagues, peers, and it's partly, of course, a much more direct tool that has also another speed than a book.
Yeah,
we can also, when we do a series on e-flux architecture on certain topics, they're usually collaborations with either academic institutions, like currently with Princeton University, for instance, or museums or biennales. The very speed of production is incomparable with a book. And that's something where you can generate a discussion in a field in a cultural field. So I think what we all try to do also, and I think this is one of the primary goals of an institution like the Angewandte, is to be part of a contemporary discussion and to have a say in it and to produce it. And this is where I think websites can be incredibly productive. Same with books, but I think for me it's one thing anyway.
I would like only to add to this before concluding the session, because this is a perfect end to today's discussion. I would like to add only that printed books replaced things called Inkunalumba that used to be, done manually, and there were only few things physical, and at that time they were really new, innovative virtual things, because they were able to be printed many times. And maybe in that moment, not maybe, but in that moment, the ones that were still existing as the previous incarnation, meaning, really done by hand, written by hand with the drawings already, were the really relevant ones. So the ones that are were still having certain things to be addressed, that were specific to the content they portrayed. So, and I personally believe that this is the future of the book. There are only the really relevant ones, the ones that are outstanding things in themselves that deserve to be physical, physical printed, in series, will last. So I believe that with this, we can conclude the session. Have been like a great discussion. Thank you very much, Nikolaus, for accepting, the invitation of being with us, being a part of the advisory board, and having followed the thing was extraordinarily relevant for us to have you on board. Thank you very much, Alex. A pleasure, as usual, to work with you. And thank you to the audience. So we hope that this could be repeated next time. We'll invite you to, we will acknowledge and invite you to come and to the next presentation, the next event. That will be basically the Vienna launch of the physical artifact at the end of April. So stay in touch with forA. Keep on double checking the website with the new updates that will be following this launch, and see you very soon. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Efren and Christina.
Thank you.
Well, ciao, ciao.
Goodbye. Have a nice evening, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Nice evening,
Thank you.
everybody.